Look at an American skyline for 10 seconds, and you'll think you're seeing style. Look closer, really closer, and you're watching a coded message being broadcast in steel and glass. Because American architecture isn't just pretty buildings. It's a survival log, a status signal, a technology report, a national identity crisis written in wood, brick, stone, steel, and light. And the strangest part, some of the smartest modern building logic on this land existed long before Europeans arrived. Climate smart, community built, site-specific design that most timelines barely spotlight. So, no, this isn't a boring timeline. This is the hidden logic behind why America keeps changing its face. Because every time the country rebuilt itself, it wasn't random. It was a reaction to weather, to politics, to pride, to fire, to money, to new materials. And once you see that, you'll never look at a courthouse, a Victorian house, or a skyscraper the same way again. Let's start where the story pretends it begins. The 1600s, back then, settlers weren't trying to invent an American look. They were trying not to die. So what they built came from two forces, one inside the head, one under the feet: memory and materials. Memory, because they carried European building habits with them like invisible blueprints. Materials, because this land decided what was possible. Forests. Timber becomes life. Clay. Brick becomes security. Winters that punish mistakes. You build tight, practical, efficient, no fancy risks. And because different colonial groups arrived, British, Dutch, French, you don't get one clean style. You get a patchwork. Homes, churches, settlement buildings, each shaped by local resources and cultural instinct. But then something changes. America starts trying to look like an idea. The early republic is young and nervous, like someone walking into a room full of older nations, trying to appear confident without showing fear. So architecture stops being only shelter. It becomes propaganda. In the most elegant way, suddenly you see symmetry, order, a craven to look rational. Federal and Georgian traditions start speaking a new language. Stability, authority, control. And then comes the deliberate pivoting, because the founding generation didn't just want buildings that worked, they wanted buildings that symbolized. So America borrows the visual vocabulary of ancient republics, especially Greece and Rome, because columns and pediments don't just decorate. They declare. They say, this government is legitimate. They say, these ideals are permanent. They say, we belong in the lineage of republics. Now, listen to how strange that is. A brand new country tries to look ancient, so people will trust it. Then, around the 1820s, the message gets louder. Greek revival arrives like a uniform. Not because every architect suddenly fell in love with marble temples, but because Greece became a shortcut word for democracy. So banks, courthouses, public buildings, especially the ones that wanted obedience, start wearing temple front confidence. But here's the twist. Greek revival didn't only communicate freedom, it also communicated power. It told ordinary people, without saying a word, this institution is solid. Don't question it. And America wasn't building in just one mood. Right beside Greek revival rises something totally different. Gothic revival. More verticalan. More dramatic, more emotional. If Greek revival is the voice of the state, calm, controlled, official, Gothic revival is the voice of awe, pointed arches, spires, romance, intensity. So by to meet 1800s, you can already see America splitting into architectural personalities. One wants to be rational. One wants to be cinematic. And then the country hits the throttle. The Victorian and industrial era turns architecture into a mirror of a society in motion. Cities are swelling. Factories are reshaping life. Transportation gets faster, and building technology does something dangerous. It starts breaking old limits. Victorian architecture becomes the symbol of that moment, ornamented, expressive, sometimes excessive. A little bit like the country itself. But while the outside gets decorative, The real revolution is happening underneath. Inside the structure, inside the systems, inside the pipeline that moves materials like blood through a growing machine. Because once you can mass-produce parts, once you can standardize and repeat, architecture becomes less handmade and more industrial. The Great Chicago Fire. This isn't just tragedy. This is a turning point that rewires the future. Chicago burned so severely, it forces a brutal question into the open. Do we rebuild the old way, or do we rebuild smarter? The aftermath pushes changes in how the city thinks about planning and fire safety, helping drive stronger approaches to materials and building codes. The business district under pressure. Everybody wants more space, closer to the center, but the map has limits. This is where the skyscraper stops being a fantasy and becomes a solution. A new technology becomes the quiet hero of the skyline. The steel-framed high. That leap happens in Chicago, driven by intense growth and land value pressure. Now picture the impact. When steel frames take over the job of holding a building up, thick masonry walls stop being the prison. Buildings can get taller, windows can get larger, interiors can get brighter. The city can become vertical ambition, made physical. This is where the so-called Chicago School enters the story. Architects and engineers among the first to promote steel frame construction for commercial buildings, shaping the early language of modern tall building design. So the skyline isn't just a skyline. It's a financial graph in 3 dimensions. It's what happens when money, engineering, and urgency all agree on one thing: build higher. But America doesn't become a nation of towers only. At the exact moment, cities reach upward. Another movement emerges that pulls the American home back toward the horizon. The early 1900s arrive, and the mood shifts. People get tired of heavy ornament, tired of clutter, tired of architecture that feels like it's wearing too much jewelry. This is the doorway into modernism: cleaner lines, new materials, and a hunger for function. And inside this era, one figure becomes unavoidable: Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright doesn't just design houses, he challenges the emotional shape of American living. His Prairie style pushes horizontally flat or hipped roofs, broad overhangs, windows grouped in horizontal bands so the building feels like it belongs to the landscape instead of fighting it. It's almost like he's saying, stop trying to dominate nature, start trying to live with it. He opens plans, stretches lines, lets homes breathe, grounded, expansive, calm. And when you place Prairie homes beside the Victorians that came before them, you can feel the rebellion in your bones. Victorian says, "Look at me." Prairie says, "Look through me toward the land." And while Wright reshapes the house, modern architecture more broadly embraces materials that change everything again. Steel and glass not just as tools, but as identity. Now the structure can be honest, the building can show what it is, and the future starts looking modern, beat. Then we cross into the contemporary era, roughly the 1950s to know in the story. Stops being one river. It becomes a delta. Styles branch out, collide, remix. Modernism evolves further. Then comes a reaction: postmodernism, bringing back references and playfulness after strict minimalism. Then even more radical experiments. Forms that look broken on purpose. Designs that refuse symmetry. Buildings that seem like they're moving while standing still. But while styles fight for attention, something else rises quietly at first, then like a verdict. Performance. Because late 20th and 21st century buildings stop being judged only by beauty or size. They start being judged like systems. How much energy do you burn? How do you handle heat? How do you control daylight? What materials did you consume just to exist? In money, Plaza sustainability becomes a main event: designing not just for aesthetics, but for environmental impact and efficiency. And in the suburbs, another force spreads. Large, neo-eclectic homes, sometimes criticized as McMansions, where size and mixed influences become the signal. So modern America ends up with contradictions living side by side. On one street, restrained, high-performance, sustainable design. On another, oversized homes built to project status through sheer scale. Same country, different values, different messages. Now before we close this story, we have to unlock the missing room. Because if we be honest, American architecture didn't start in the 1600s. It started much earlier, long before European arrival. Indigenous communities across North America were building with deep environmental intelligence structures shaped by climate, landscape, and community life. One of the clearest examples is Pueblo architecture in the Southwest. Traditional Pueblo forms used adobe blocks, terraced, multi-level design, and large connected room systems, some reaching multiple stories organized around courtyards and shared space. And that matters for one reason. It reveals that modern ideas, local materials, climate response, community planning weren't invented recently. They were already here. So when we ask what influenced American architecture, the true answer is bigger than most summaries admit: indigenous knowledge, then European traditions, then the political need for symbolism, then industry and urban growth, then catastrophe and rebuilding, then engineering breakthroughs, then visionary individuals, then sustainability and technology reshaping the rules once more. And if you zoom out even further, the entire story runs on three engines: identity, technology, pressure. Identity because nations use buildings to project what they want to be. Technology because new materials change what's physically possible. Pressure because disasters, growth, and economics force change faster than taste ever could. That's why the Great Chicago Fire isn't just history, it's a trigger. That SY steel frames aren't just engineering. They re the reason the sky became buildable. That SY Wright's Prairie homes aren't just a style, they re a philosophy about living, land, and modern life. So the real mystery isn't which style came first. The mystery is deeper. Why did America keep reinventing its architecture so fast? And the answer is almost uncomfortable. Because architecture looks like art, but it behaves like evidence. It shows you what a society worshipped, what it wanted to prove, and what it had no choice but to become. So, next time you see a courthouse dressed like a Greek temple, a Victorian house overloaded with detail, a Chicago skyscraper cutting into the clouds, or a modern glass building built like a machine, what pressure created this? It becomes a confession.